Here I've used the shatter effect and I've used particular. Those are the main two effects. For the lighting I've used null light factory and the shine effect. Now the original idea for this came from some poster art that I was supplied with. Let's just take a look at that. This is just a small piece of the poster art, and you can see there's the Batman bat, and there's these pieces shattering off the bat, revealing these light sources. And I thought that would be a terrific basis for the promo. Originally I thought maybe I could do it in 3D, but I'd actually just seen when I did this a tutorial by Lloyd Alvarez over on AfterEffectsTuts.com, and that showed how to use a custom shatter map with shatter. And I was aware that you could use custom shatter maps with shatter, but I'd never really had a good tutorial on how to use that. I've never really seen a good tutorial on how to use that. And here it is here, design a breathtaking body shatter effect. So definitely take a look at that, because I'm not going to be covering how to use the shatter effect in detail, but Lloyd certainly does. Alright, so the first thing I had to do was create a vector version of this bat, and I did that using Illustrator. So let's just go across to Illustrator, and I'll just make a new file. I'm going to bring in the bat layer, so I'm going to place that. And there it is. Okay, one thing you can do to use layers as a template is to double click them and click on template, and you can also choose to dim the image. I'm going to make that 75. Okay, now that's locked, so I can't move that around when I'm doing my drawing. Now make a new layer above that, grab the pen tool. I'm going to make this very rough. Just drag out a ruler so I can split the bat in two, and just click and just trace this. Do this very quickly. Need to just turn off my fill. You'll probably hear a few motorbikes and things going past. Sunday morning here in Sydney. Just drag it up to the end here. Now I told you this wasn't going to be step by step, but I just thought this is a good little technique to show you guys. And around. What you want to do when you're working in Illustrator, when you're creating paths, is use as few control points as possible. Just keeps things nice and simple, and they'll render much faster. Just come in here, and I'm going to just turn on Smart Guides. That way I can see the path. I'm just going to click and click. Okay, so next thing to do is just to reflect that and copy it. Just make sure it's selected, and underneath the rotate tool you'll find the reflect tool. I'm just going to hold down the Option key or Alt on Windows and click on either the top point or the bottom point that's over the guide, and you can see it's already reflected, and I've got a preview here. I'm going to copy it. Okay, and now what I want to do is just select those points. They should be right on top of each other. Press Command J, and that will join them. I'm going to join them smoothly on the top, and I'm going to join them with a corner on the bottom. And just come into the top here, grab my pen tool, and just round that out. And that's how I created the bat. Simple as that. So what I just did then was just to delete that and fill the whole thing with black. Just turn off the stroke and fill it with black. And that's it, guys. So that's the bat done. I'm not going to save that. It's going to come straight back into After Effects. And the next thing was to create the shatter. I put the bat into its own comp because the bat Illustrator file is used throughout the project, and having it in its own comp just means that when we make any changes, or if we need to make any changes to the bat layer, it'll be updated in all of the comps where that bat comp is used. So let's just take a look now at the shatter map comp. Now this is where the shatter map was created. And like I mentioned before, you need to check out the tutorial by Lloyd Alvarez over on After Effects Tuts, and you'll get all the details of how to create that shatter map. I'm going to show you how I modified that map. So we'll just solo the bottom layer. There's the bat, and next is the shadow map. Notice how the shadow map has been cut out by the shape of the bat, and that's happening because I have this checked here, preserve transparency. If I turn it off, now we can see the full shadow map layer, but I've just used the bottom layer as a cookie cutter by turning on preserve transparency for the shadow map layer. The next layer is 01 bat again, but to this one you can see I've applied a lot of masks, and if I just turn it on, you can also see that it has a fill effect. It also has this effect here, Minimax. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now I filled it with white, and if you have watched Lloyd's tutorial, you'll know that all of the areas of white won't be affected by the shatter effect, and only these areas here where they're masked will be shattered. Now the reason I've got Minimax on is if you notice up the top here, you can see just a few pixels of our fractal colorama layer just coming through on the edges, and that was giving quite an ugly edge to the bat in the main comp. So I've just used Minimax to expand those edges, and it gives us a clean edge in the main comp. If I just turn that off, we go into our main comp. I'm just going to turn this proxy off. Have a look here, you can see that's quite jagged. If I turn the effect back on, it's much better, it's much smoother. Okay, so next I want to talk to you a little bit about these masks. Now I decided where to shadow the bat based on this image here. I've added a few little extra ones in there, and I basically did that by just grabbing the pen tool and just drawing a mask. I'll just draw one here, and you can see obviously that mask is very round. I wanted masks that looked really fractured, and you could easily just click control points and drag it out and just add a bunch of detail, but that's pretty labor intensive. What I did was to copy the mask and to whip across to Illustrator, just make a new document and paste. Now I'll need to put a stroke on this. Let's just get the stroke. If we don't put a stroke on it, we won't see the effect. Now the effect I'm going to choose is Distort and Transform, Roughen. If you're using a version prior to Illustrator CS4, you can choose an effect or you can choose a filter, but filters were removed in Illustrator CS4, and now we only have effects. And the key difference is that effects we can modify. With filters, when you apply them, once you've applied it, you get what you get and you can't go back and change it. But effects can be updated and changed. So Adobe's removed the filters menu and now only has effects, which makes sense. So I'm going to choose Distort and Transform, Roughen, and I'm going to preview that, and I'm going to increase the detail to about there and click OK. And notice here how the path itself isn't affected. That's because we've applied an effect. If I was to copy and paste this mask back into After Effects now, we wouldn't see anything. So what we have to do is we have to expand the appearance. And now that effect has been basically baked, and we can't make changes to that effect anymore, but we can use this mask in After Effects. So I'm going to copy that, come back to After Effects, and I want to replace this mask with the new mask. So what I'm going to do is double click this layer, and in the layer panel from the target menu I'm going to choose Target Mask 11 because Mask 11 is that mask, and paste. And that replaces the targeted mask with the new mask. This is a little known feature in After Effects. Most people that I showed to go, I never knew that existed. And you can use it to target masks and replace masks, just like we did here. Just drag that back over there. If we go back to the main comp and just move our time indicator. Now, we aren't seeing any hole there, and I know why. That's because in the shadow map comp, we have to make that mask subtract mode. Okay, now if we go back to the main comp, you see a big hole there. Now, these areas that I've already done, you see they've got some nice little fissures in here, these little sort of very fine cracks. What I did was I modified the After Effects mask just by literally dragging out. Let's just change the color of this mask so we can see it. Let's make it like a dark blue. I literally just dragged out some points and you can see it. Let's just grab the main comp. We'll just put these comps side by side just a moment. And just view the shadow map. Okay, unlock that. You can see when I drag out these points, one of these points, we get these finer cracks. And I just did that just to add a little bit more detail. Like that, maybe a little bit finer. A little bit too much. You can see if it's too fine, the Minimax is closing up the gap. So I just had to adjust that. We need to be able to see this fractal colorama effect in order for it to affect the bat in the shadow comp. Like that. Okay, so that's how I added the detail to the masks. We don't want this mask though, I'm going to delete that. It was important to shadow the bat, but not shadow it so much that it didn't look like a bat anymore. And I definitely didn't want any holes within the bat, only around the edges. Okay, so let's just close all this up. And that's how the shadow map was made. So what we'll do now is just close this guy here. And we'll take a look at how the shatter settings were set up. So I'm going to open up Bat Shatter. And here's the shattered bat. Let's just hide this. Looks pretty good, huh? So what we're going to do is just select the bat layer, and to see which properties have been affected or which properties have been changed, I'm just going to press the U key twice, and that'll just reveal the properties of shadow that I actually changed. Just quickly walk through this. The pattern that I used is custom, and of course we wanted to use the shadow map that was created, so I had to choose custom. So the custom shadow map was O2 shadow map. And look at this, white tiles fixed is on. Again, that's important because we want only the areas that aren't white to be affected. And we didn't want this area of the bat to be affected. Now to see the forces, we can choose wireframe front view plus forces. And you can see the forces actually stop. They get to a certain point and then stop. Let's just drag this. So they go across. And as the radius increases and the bat is affected by the force, you can see the pieces just shoot off. Just go back to rendered. Now I made the extrusion depth quite small because I didn't want big chunks or thick chunks. Just wanted them pretty thin. And the only other thing is to really talk about, and this was very important, is the physics. Specifically gravity inclination. If I just reset this, watch what happens. As the forces go through the bat, all of the pieces just fall straight down. And that's got to do with the gravity as well. What I wanted, because this had to be like a 10-second pack shot, was for the pieces to break off and just slowly fly towards the camera. And I did that by setting gravity inclination to 90. You can see now as the pieces break off, they just slowly fly towards the camera, almost like they're in space. Very nice. And look at all the detail in the edges of the bat here. That's all because of those masks, those modified masks. Okay, so that's the bat shatter. The next comp is bat particles. And these are basically just bats flying out from the bat, which is used as a custom emitter, and this is using particular. So you can see this layer is turned off. This is the custom emitter, the bat layer. Let's just press UU to reveal what's changed here. Particular has the emitter type set to layer, and as I mentioned, that's set to 01 bat. Particles are directional. I want them to fly straight towards the camera. And I've spread the direction out a little bit because I didn't want them all to be bunched up. I wanted them to sort of fly out to the sides. Didn't want too many bats in the center area here. These bats don't look particularly realistic, and you can see towards the end of the comp, some of them get quite large and they look pretty fake. It kind of reminded me of those bats that you see in those B-grade horror films, where the bats hang on a piece of fishing line and sort of bobbing up and down in front of the actress who's freaking out. So I wanted them to look like bats, but not have people be able to look at them for any period of time and see that they were really fake looking. And you can see I've changed the particle type to custom. And under custom, for the layer, I've chosen bat particle. And the bat particle is a modified particle which comes from a Making It Look Grade 5 tutorial by Multanen. Let's just take a look at that. This tutorial is called Butterfly Man, and in this tutorial Multanen shows us how to make a character burst into hundreds of butterflies, and he's created a custom butterfly using 3D stroke and masks. Now you can purchase this tutorial individually from MotionWorks, or you can grab it and it's a little bit cheaper as part of the Making It Look Great 5 release. Now what's happened here is Multanen's used 3D stroke and he's linked a couple of layers with masks to the 3D stroke. A pretty clever thing to do. I certainly wouldn't be able to do this myself. All I've done is gone to the controller layer and adjusted how fast they go, which is how fast the wings flap, because I wanted my bats to flap the wings pretty fast. So I've just increased that amount. But check out the Butterfly Man tutorial for more on how to use this custom particle. One thing I did also was just to adjust the wings, just to make them look a bit more batty. You can see they've been linked using an expression, these masks, which means that if I change one wing, it'll change the other wing. As I drag it, you can see. That was a new feature included in After Effects CS6, was the ability to link masks together. So I gave the butterfly bat wings. And of course fill the whole thing with black using an adjustment layer. One thing that makes the bat look a little more realistic is to use motion blur. Let's just switch motion blur on. This kind of disguises them a little bit and definitely made the render slower, but was a worthwhile thing to do. Let's just turn that off. Okay, so there's the bat particles. And the next thing was to combine the bat shatter and the bat particles in another comp, and that's the bat shatter particles comp. So as I drag through here, you'll see the pieces flying off, and you'll start to see a few little bats flying out of the bat. There's one there. I really wanted these bats to be pretty subtle because, as I mentioned, these are pretty fake looking bats, and anything that's too big, or if there's too many of them, starts to look really crazy, look really silly. Just wanted it to be really subtle, even if it meant that someone watched this promo and didn't even notice the bats. Maybe they'd watched it a few times before they'd noticed them. Okay, so that's the finished bat shatter particles, the main part of the project. The next thing was to create another new comp and to add all of the lighting effects. And you can see what a difference the lighting effects make. So let's turn off some layers here. Here's the base layer. And I'm going to turn off motion blur. That'll speed things up. Right, so the first thing to do was to add some lens flares behind the bat. Just going to turn that on and just solder this layer. These are Null Light Factory flares. You can see I've got left 1, 4, 2, 3. Let's just change the order of these. Left 1, 2, 3, 4, and right 1, 2, 3. I've actually named the flares so I know which one's which. If you want to name an effect, you can, and I just did that by pressing return and typing in the name. If I delete that, you'll go back to the original name. For this one is LF Glow, and these are all LF Glows. Good idea to name effects, especially if you've got a lot of the same effects in one comp. So these lights sit behind the bat, and you can see they're obvious that they're there before the bat has shattered. But once the bat shatters, they become more obvious. What I've done is I've used one of my favorite features of Null Light Factory, which is the obscuration layer feature. So I've used the bat layer, the bat shadow particles layer, as an obscuration layer. I use its alpha channel, and what that means is that if the light is behind that layer, the flare is less visible. But as that layer starts to shatter and the alpha channel changes, then that light becomes more visible. Now, if you want to learn more about how to use the obscuration layer, what you can do is go to Red Giant Software, because Null Light Factory Pro is a Red Giant Software plugin, and there's a Getting Started tutorial by myself, and I talk you through how to use the obscuration feature. You can also find that tutorial on MotionWorks as well in the tutorials section. So obscuration is a very, very important feature in with flares, and it really is a powerful feature as well. But notice how it still looks pretty fake because there's no light wrapping around the edges here. What we needed was to have some light in front of the bat as well. So what I did was duplicate the flare's lower layer and put it above the bat shadow particles layer, and now you can see that we have some light peeking out over the edges. It looks so much better. To this layer, I've also used some stripes. Let's just delete that name, LF Stripe, and you apply this effect, by the way, by choosing Effect, Null Light Factory, and here's all the parts of the lens flares. So LF Stripes here down the bottom, and I also use LF Glow. Let's just undo that. So you can see how the light is flaring out over the edges. Now I've also used the obscuration layer for these as well. You can see it is set to the alpha for the bat shadow particles layer. But I've done something else as well. I've animated the global brightness of all of these flares. Let's go back to here. Actually, we can go back even further. Watch what happens if I change the global brightness from the first flare to anything other than 0. Let's make it 5. You can actually see the flare. You must have the brightness at 0, otherwise you can see the flare in front of the layer. So what I've done is I've just animated that up from 0 so that we don't see it until the bat has cleared that point. Otherwise it looks a bit silly having that light appear in front of the bat, because remember, the light is supposed to be behind the bat and then just sort of creeping out over the edges here. And lastly, I've just used the blend mode hard light to give it this this rich blue. If I change that to normal, you can see it's very flat. The stripe is very effective. As the layer becomes less obscured, you can see the stripe just shoots out and becomes brighter. Very nice. So you're not always going to be able to get the effect that you want with one flare, even if you're using obscuration. Sometimes you have to put flares in front and behind. Okay, so that's the lens flares. And I didn't put stripes in front of all of them because I didn't think it looked good to have stripes in front of all of them. This one here doesn't have a stripe, neither does this one. Okay, so next is shine. Now shine is just one of those effects that you have to have in your motion graphics arsenal. And I'd be very surprised if you haven't heard of shine. Let's just solid the shine layer. This is once again the 01 bat layer, and I've just renamed it shine. Let's just solid that. You can see it has shine applied, and I've changed the color of the layer just by using the fill effect, just made it a light blue. But notice how I've used masks to isolate where the shine effect appears. Let's just change those, or turn those masks off. And unsolo. This is how it would look if we just had shine around the entire bat. And I don't like that. I don't think that looks very realistic. I think it looked much better to have the shine isolated to the brighter areas. So that's why I use masks. And you can see that looks much better. Got rid of those really white edges around the top here. So use shine by all means, but just control how much shine is on your objects. You don't have to just put shine behind everything. And only a couple more things that I did. One thing that made a really big difference was to put some rim lighting or some backlighting on areas where the bat has shattered, and that was really easy to do. You'll see I've got this highlights right and highlights left layers. I'm going to solo those. All this is once again the O1 bat layer, or the O1 bat comp, filled with a light blue and just masked with soft feathered masks and just offset slightly. So you see here, if I just select the right one, just use my arrow keys, all I've done is just change the position of that bat so that it gives us a slight rim on the edges of the shattered pieces of the bat. And why have I got left and right? Well, I've got right because we've got this light, or this shine, shining out to the right. So it made sense to have the light on the edges of the objects on the left side. And the other side, you can see the light is on the right hand side. So just a minor detail, but just something that makes this kind of thing look even more realistic. And on top of that we have a adjustment layer, and this is just got curves applied. If I just turn that off, you can see it's quite flat. The adjustment layer just gives it a rich blue color, just using a standard S curve, and I've just adjusted the blue slightly in the midtones. And last but not least is the text. Now this text is just standard After Effects text, which I've tracked out, and I've applied the ramp effect just to change the color at the bottom of the text, just to match the poster art that I showed you. Just after I did this tutorial, Multanen released a new text ramp effect, and the key difference between this and, say, the ramp effect is that when you apply this effect, you can move the text in, say, Z space, and the effect won't move on the text. Let's take a look. I'll show you what I mean. If I was to animate this text now with the ramp effect applied, watch what happens when I drag it forward here. The ramp effect actually disappears because the ramp effect is back here and it's no longer affecting the text. The text effect by Multanen fixes that, so that means you can animate the text in 3D space, or you can scale the text and it won't shift. The ramp won't shift. I could fix this by pre-composing this layer, but Multanen's effect just means you don't have to pre-compose. And pre-composing just takes time and just makes it more difficult to do versioning. So I definitely would have used Multanen's effect in this if it had been out when this project was done. And that's it, guys, the Dark Knight. Just go back to the main. I hope you like it. I really enjoyed doing this. I'm glad I did it in After Effects rather than doing it in 3D. It was a great experience, and I really know how to use shatter now. So it's something that I'll be able to use again in the future, I'm sure. But for now, this is John Dickinson from MotionWorks. Have fun